Okay, good morning. It's good to see you all. Thank you all for coming. I feel a little bit like Boyzone. You know, because they did that, didn't they, where they were all sat down singing, and then they choreographed the standing up. I just feel a bit like that. A cross between Boyzone, Dave's got something to say.
That's definitely where the similarities end, by the way.
Yeah, I hope so. A little bit like a cross between Boyzone and Steve Jobs. So you know Steve Jobs, the iPhone guy, Apple, and he's very famous when he was alive for demonstrating and for showing the next greatest gadget that they were going to do. And today is a really exciting day, actually. It's an exciting day because we're going to be talking today about the Antioch Network, which is a new ministry, a branded ministry that we're pulling together as a church because we want to be more intentional in the way that we operate, both internationally and here. We want to be, in a sense, the way that we interact with people, we want to have something that we can call it, so that as we communicate to you, the congregation, to others too, that people will understand, well, what are your connections into this different place, whether it be here local or whether it be abroad. And so today, we want to talk about the Antioch Network. As part of that, you will have heard us talk lots over the last months about things like the hallmarks of an Antioch church, lots about the history of Barnabas and what we've been called to in the sense of being an Antioch resource base. So today we're going to take you on a journey, and the journey is quite long, and we've only got a very short amount of time, although we started early, so in that sense we've got a couple more minutes, which will be really valuable. So between Dave and myself, we're going to introduce some of the history. We're going to talk about what this is and what that means for us corporately, what it means internationally, what it might mean locally as well. So that's where we're at. So it's an exciting day. So you'll excuse the analogy of Boyzone and Steve Jobs, but it is actually quite an exciting time for us as a church because in a new way, we will be able to express who we are and what we're about. We're going to be really intentional moving forward. Over to Dave.
Okay, thanks, Phil. So this word, Antioch, has always been something that's in the DNA of the church, if you like, for many, many years. When back in the 1990s, we were investigating a church network to be part of, and we developed a friendship with a guy called Dave Devonish, based out of Bedford. Many of you will remember those days. And he came to the church, and he really prophesied over us about being an Antioch church, being a resource base for ministry to go out from here. And that's something that's always been in the background. And it's true that as a church, we've always had a heart for the nations. It's there in our mission statement, if you like, a community church for Shrewsbury, the region, and the nations, realizing that from here we can have an impact in a much wider space. And over the years, that's been expressed in a number of different ways that many of us will be familiar with. The most overarching one, I think, would be our links with the nation of Ukraine, especially through Martin in the early days, in the last 7 years or so, through Phil. And Bread Trust has always been around sort of social action and supporting local churches in their mercy ministries, but it has become more, and as new churches were started and working with Igor, it's become more intentional about building the church in that nation. A few years ago, a team from here went to Kenya, and a number of people here this morning were part of that team, and we developed a number of relationships and connections, including one that's continued with a guy called Fred Asore, and Phil's been able to visit and build on that, and that's something that's there as a connection that we have. And we've had all sorts of other links, and the kind of people who, when they're in Shrewsbury, we invite them to come and talk or be interviewed. We obviously spoke about Lizzie last week, but people like Phil and Emma Whittle, who went from Hope Church to then plant a church in Stockholm, and Richard and Judy working into the Middle East who were with us a few months ago. So lots of relationships, lots of connections, but no clear way of actually joining the dots or helping to explain what the bigger picture looks like, or why is this person suddenly being introduced to the whole church. And then closer to home, as we look at the county of Shropshire, there was a development of a local region of churches. It started with the Shropshire churches, and we had connections with a church in Stafford, a church in Rugeley. We were able ourselves from here to plant a church in North Shrewsbury and in Whitchurch, and then together with the other churches in the area, we planted a new church in Wrexham. But it's fair to say that sort of local side of it has gone a bit cold in the last few years for a number of reasons. But on the ground, in the background, I've got really good ongoing relationships, and I meet roughly monthly with the leaders from Dorley and Admaston and Whitchurch, and we've been building friendship over the last 6 months or so with other leaders who are local to us within our network, like the churches in Stoke and back to Stafford especially, and then some guys from over in Derby and Burton. So we're still aware of those things, but that's like a story that's going on behind the scenes that you might not be aware of. And so this call to be an Antioch church, it's always been there in the background. It's there, I think it's page 3 of the Introducing Barnabas course that we talk about it, but it is also something that we haven't always been intentional in or have a clear way of expressing how we're going to put it into practice. In 2 Kings 22, King Josiah, he's collecting money for the refurbishment of the temple, and they raise some money, and as they're doing the refurbishment, the high priest at the time, called Hilkiah, as part of his process, in some office in the back of the temple, he finds the old book of the law. And this is an astonishingly important document, a foundational thing for the people of God there, but somehow over the time it's been mislaid, and they weren't quite sure where it was. And it feels to me like since COVID and the various ways this church has journeyed through the last 5 years, we've been doing some rebuilding. We've been rebuilding the eldership. We've been rebuilding the leadership team. We've been rebuilding what it means to be allowed to gather together here on a Sunday. And it feels like as we've been doing that, we've now found again this promise from God that's been with us all the time, but has sort of ended up back in an office somewhere in a box because it got tidied away after we flooded to try and look after everything. In this passage, Josiah, he responds by leading the people of God into recommitting themselves to the covenant that their forefathers had made, actually saying, yeah, we realize this was a previous generation, but we are going to make it good in our day, and promise themselves again to God. And it feels like for us as a church, like prophetically, that story really resonates with me, because I feel like this is a time to go back to one of the key foundational prophetic calls that God has given us and really see how we can put it into practice going forward. So that's some background from the church's perspective. That's the big wide story, but in the background of that, there's also the personal story of Phil and his involvement. And so it's over to him to share a bit of that.
Great, thank you. So obviously I'm old at 49, and for some of you that means that you think that's not very old, and for others that's like ancient. But there's a history, isn't there? There's a history with all of us. There's a history of calling. And calling's really important. So there's calling from the church's perspective, and there's calling from the personal perspective. And some of you have known me since I was very little, and so I'm telling you stuff. I've got a few eyes being raised. I'm telling you stuff that you already know. But so I was brought up in a family where it was my mum and my brother, and I remember there's a few key moments that I'd just like to highlight to you as to showing some of the journey that God's taken me on over the years. So I remember as a young boy crying because I didn't have a dad at home on my own in my bedroom, and God comforting me personally. And I mean that, like personally, God being my father. So back in the day, we used to sing that song, didn't we? Father God, I wonder. And that song was like an anthem for my life at that time, because I literally didn't know how I would have survived without the knowledge and the care of Father God. And he personally comforted me at those times, and I still remember that now. And it's given me a depth of relationship with him that I am so grateful for. There are lots of intervening times and lots of ups and downs, and we're going to focus on the ups today. There are plenty of downs, which many of you guys will know. But when I was about 14, I was at a summer camp in the south of Wales, and there was a person that didn't know me at all. We'd been there for less than a week, and he prophesied over me some profound words that struck home, and I believe that when prophetic words land, you have a responsibility to live to them, that you have to chase after them. They don't just miraculously or bizarrely happen to fulfill. And yet at around 14 years of age, there were these words spoken over me. And even at that moment, I felt like, wow, they're incredibly big, and I don't know what they mean quite. But if they're real, then God, will you reconfirm those? And within 2 weeks, there was a person who knew me better back here in a home church in Crowmore at the time. He knew who I was, but he didn't know me very well. And he said identically the same words. And at this, I was like, okay, God, I got it. Even me, the teenager, 14, I hear you. I'm going to start living towards that. Again, a number of years were ups and downs, mainly downs, to be fair. And as I went, I came back from university, and I was in a right mess. I didn't really know who I was or what I was doing or where I was going. There was a lot of confusion. And at that moment in time, in 1997 roughly, and people like Dave Carter, who's here, helped me, Martin helped me, and others, they supported me in that time. But I pretty much gave God an ultimatum, and I've said this before off this platform, that either God, you send me somewhere, or I'm going somewhere. And God thankfully sent me to Cape Town. And as I went to Cape Town, I went to work in a church there. I met some incredible people, and some incredible words equally were spoken over me, things that resonated from all of those years previously, some 10 or more years earlier. And so there was this flow, this thread of God's call on my life. And since 1998, 99, when I was in Cape Town, my life is different, entirely different. I knew where I was going, I knew what I was called to do, and I knew where I needed to be. I'd been surrounded by people of the most excellence that I've ever met. And these guys still are my friends today, and it's such a privilege to have had them in my life. That, for me, was a turning point in my life where, although I'd always known who God was, I'd always known he had the best for me, I'd always known his love, there was just a point that there was just no way that I could ever live like I had done before, that I had to move forward. And that started then. And so this journey, this Antioch network journey, started from when I was very young, but it continues to come through. And as I became an elder here a few years ago, some friends of mine who are very prophetic, and for the last 20 years they've been prophesying over me. You know what you're called to be. You know where you're called to go. Do the thing that God has called you to do. And so as I became an elder here, having already been with Martin, travelled with Martin to Ukraine, I travelled with him to Zambia and a number of other places, I knew that the calling on me was one of old that matched that the church had about being an Antioch resource base, about going out and encouraging leaders, about helping churches do things together and alone. And so this for me is almost like a culmination of those things. And so in the last few years, we have a greater understanding of what it means to be an Antioch resource base. What does it mean to be that in Kenya? We know more about that. We've worked hard on that. Not just me, but others too. What does it mean to support Ukraine and eager and the other 14 leaders and church leaders and many other leaders in Ukraine. Well, as I stepped into that space, we moved from not only being a humanitarian aid, but being more than that, speaking to them about things that God is calling them to as well. And so those are some of the history, the plotted history. Over to you.
Okay, great. So there's another part where this then weaves into the story of this church over the years, which is that we've had a very real privilege as part of this calling of being a resource church to release ministry from here. And we've seen that be a blessing in lots of different ways. And it's worth just pointing out that up to now, primarily those have been through the ways that we've released Martin. But let's just give some clear examples so that those of you who weren't around then can catch up with part of the story. Martin being given the time to help shape the regional churches back in the day. 3 churches planted, other churches strengthened. There was a cost in time and money for us as a church, but there was a real blessing because we built relationships locally and we still maintain those relationships, and those churches still look to us for encouragement in different ways. It really felt as a member of Barnabas that we were part of something bigger because of those relationships. Another really good example is when Martin started the charity Jubilee Plus, and that came out of his Barnabas time. And we gave some financial support to it in the early days to help get it up and running. And that's now a hugely influential national network that was birthed out of this church because we were willing to release Martin into his calling. So go and have a look on their website later on this afternoon and just see the impact of something that was birthed here and grew into fruitfulness. Likewise, when Terry Hotchkiss was an elder here and we released him into his calling as an evangelist, and he used to go to other churches and be involved in preaching the gospel, praying for the sick, people being healed. And as he went and took people with him, the stories coming back, it rubbed off on us here as a church family. And it was a really exciting time to see that ministry be released. And then the blessing happened back here in the local church as well. And I can see people smiling and nodding at me as I recall that as a really important memory. We released Martin to work for Christ Central Churches, which is our part of New Frontiers, and to help to be their head of training and to help develop their training. And that included launching a school of leadership up in Sheffield, which several of us have done. I think there's 4 of our guys on School of Leadership this year. And that's remarkable, really, because not only has that ended up being a blessing to loads of people in the UK, but as we're involved with churches internationally, the resources of the School of Leadership are a primary way that we can connect with people and bless people and build leaders in these other nations. So we've released Martin to do something in the UK, but that's actually one of our prime ways that we can reach other people internationally. And then the most sort of up-to-date and obvious example, which more people will be familiar with, is the Word Online project, where Martin came and spoke to the church about feeling God was calling him to record a series of videos on the life of Jesus as a learning resource, especially considering people in the developing world who maybe couldn't access teaching materials in the same way, stuff that people could access through their phone. And so we had a number of ways people gave here, and tens of thousands of pounds was raised by us as a church congregation in that first year to get it off the ground. And then a much larger charity, Relay Trust, came in to adopt that project and to launch it far further than it could ever go just from us here in Shrewsbury. So what started as an idea and a concept in Martin's notebook in his office is now reaching thousands of people all over the world. What was birthed here through the faith of us has actually, we see the blessing all around us. And these kind of stories remind me of some of the equivalent in the Bible. What do we learn from people like Noah? Build an ark. Judgment is coming, a flood is coming, you should build an ark. But it wasn't even raining for many, many years of faithful shipbuilding of a large ship. Because of a call, it wasn't even raining yet. Likewise, when Joseph interprets Pharaoh's dream, 7 years of plenty before 7 years of famine, they could have just thought, woohoo, we've got all this extra food. Let's blow it all and buy a new car kind of thing. But they didn't. They built storehouses. They prepared. They were judicious in the way they used the food because they knew that there was a call for them in the future that required the resources that they were gathering. There wasn't a famine yet, but they responded in faith to the call of God before they saw it happen. We see it in the New Testament too. In Acts 11, Agabus stands up and he predicts a famine, and the disciples respond and they gather an offering and they raise money for the believers, especially in Judea, who were already persecuted. They were already suffering hardship, and so they collected the money together for this event that hadn't yet happened because they'd heard the call of God and because they wanted to respond in faith. So God speaks, he sets a direction, and the people respond in faith. And as God speaks about something and calls us to something, we don't see it in its fullness yet. It's not a complete picture, but there's that moment of faith that says, okay, I want to respond to you. I can see where we're headed, and we're going to have to discover what it looks like when we get there. And that's how I feel at the moment about this whole Antioch vision and where we are now, that we're just at the point of seeing the way ahead, of hearing the call of God, and this is a moment to step into that. As Phil said, we really commissioned him to look into these international links especially. And so because Phil's like the most hands-on with seeing these, it's worth you now just explaining some of the things it currently looks like.
Wonderful, thank you. So I think it's probably worth mentioning that at the back end of last year, I was mixing with a group of church leaders with international connections. And that's now come to an end, but at the end of it, we were praying over one another. And the excitement amongst the group for what was happening here at Barnabas was very, very obvious. And the prophetic words again over this church and over the mission of what we're going to step into was remarkable and very interesting. Different places, different nations, things about stepping into untrodden paths, new spaces. So this isn't about just the old connections, but it's about the way that we move those forward too. So what is this Antioch network? What does it mean for us? Well, one thing that it isn't, and we'll start with what it isn't before we start with what it is not a denomination of churches. This is not going to be that at all. We see the Antioch network as something that complements the things that we're already a part of. So it complements Christ Central, it complements Bread Trust, it complements School of Leadership and these other things that we've mentioned. What it is it's about a relationship of churches doing more together than they can apart, which is an old New Frontiers adage and prophecy. And it's true, isn't it? Because when we work with like-minded people on like-minded projects, we can do more. We have more resources. So what we've talked about over the time, and we've seen even here in the church in the last few months. So we had Eager here, remember? So when I spoke to Eager about the Antioch network, about being more formalized in the way that we respond to church needs, he was really excited about it. Karen from Armenia, who I went to see a couple of weeks ago, he is like, we're having to put the brakes on a little bit. He's so excited because he wants relationship. What we're seeing across the nations in Kenya, in Armenia, and in Ukraine is that church leaders are craving relationship and they're craving resources. And that's one of the key things that I feel that we're called to do as we start this Antioch network. So it's not a thing that you become a member of. It's a thing that you're a friend of. Does that make sense? Is that clear? So we're not leaving anything. This complements other things. And that's really, really important. Bread Trust has been an amazing tool into Ukraine, and for Igor to be called into his more leadership of the region, of that sphere that he runs there. And so as I took over the responsibility of being the ambassador for that, and then since, unfortunately, obviously there's been the big hoo-ha around the war and all of that stuff that is going on and continues and will probably continue for many years to come. Bread Trust meets the need of the people, and that is part of the evangelistic tool that we use to bring people into the churches. We've spoken about that. I've told you that many church members have left, and now churches are very young in their age and stage. And so what we're seeing now, though, is things like, and it could be the same in Kenya even, where they say, well, we're going to do an evangelistic piece of work, and we're going to use School of Leadership. And we're like, well, that's not quite the right thing to do. Like that is a tool, but you're almost using a screwdriver when you need a spanner, or you're using a spanner when you need a hammer. So one of the key things that we're able to do in this Antioch network, because of the resources that we already have, is that we can match the need to the item. So we can use School of Leadership as a primary tool for training leaders. That's what it's for. It's what it says on the tin. We can use Alpha or Christianity Explored. We can use all of these other tools, not that we've necessarily written ourselves. Some we have, like Start Right is another great thing that many of you, and I certainly have been through as we lead on to baptism. So we can do all of these things. For some, we will introduce them to our friends. Well, for all, we'll introduce them to our friends. For some, that might mean, well, we would love to be a part of New Frontiers. Great. Come and meet our friends. We did that with Eager, if you remember. He joined Christ Central because we introduced him to Jeremy, and it's a fabulous relationship that's working really well. For others, they won't, and that's okay too, because they're our friend, they're our connection. And so we've been and we've spoken. I spoke with Jeremy actually a couple of days ago. I went and met with him from Christ Central, and I explained to him, and he was really excited about it. His message was basically just go for it, 100% go for it. And that's fabulous. So we're doing all of these things together. So far, when we talk about the Antioch Network, it's all abroad. We believe that won't necessarily be the case going forward. So I spoke a couple of weeks ago, and I said that we are praying about church planting here in the UK. That would fit neatly into this, wouldn't it? Because when we church plant, we would want to link people. We want to do more together than we can apart. So the things that we look to do, and the way that we've done it to date, is things like conferences, drawing leaders together. So we have a conference in Ukraine scheduled for April next year, where we're going to draw a whole load of internationals together. We're going to get Karen in from Armenia. We can encourage leaders by doing these things. We can go and we can be. Just being there is an encouragement to them. But knowing that we're with them in heart and in spirit, and also sometimes financially, that really helps the whole picture. When I was in Armenia, I was privileged to meet the church leaders that they have there. They have 8 elders, and we had some fruit and some drink together. We had a great time, and they are really excited about what this might mean for them. They realized that, they have this problem in the Karabakh zone. There's churches that are in that area. I believe there's 5 or 6 churches that are there. They're linked to Karen. So as we were praying this morning, the 100,000 people that are leaving that zone, that will be the churches. So that is an area, even this very week, that I was speaking to Karen about. How are we going to help you? What can we do? As it happens as well, New Frontiers centrally is looking to raise a fund. And that will actually be administered through Christ Central, and we will be a part of helping to administer that, because they need our help with that, some of the skills that we have from Bread Trust, for example. There's training and development, and I'm going to invite you to look at the website in a minute, which is the thing that's on the screen. When you go home, not now, you're not allowed to look at it right now, but when you go home, you can have a look at it, and you can see that if you click on Kenya, for example, in there are other things other than just churches, that there are mercy ministries. So there are things there. There's a health clinic and there's a preschool that we are a part of, that we will continue to help. And I will be soon coming around asking for assistance in that. But equally, School of Leadership now is across the globe. The thing that Martin has written and is in charge of for Christ Central, that is across the globe. It's in Kenya already. It's in Kenya in English. It's about to be in Kenya in Swahili, which is the same as it is in Tanzania. It's about to go, and it's being currently translated into Russian. So it will be in Ukraine. It will be in Armenia. So we'll be able to use training as a primary arm of what we do to help train, encourage, and move forward. All of these things are what Antioch Network will be. And we are in the center of that currently. But the belief and the way that we see it moving forward is it will become more and more decentralized. So, as an example, Karen is very excited. He's exceptionally well connected. He's well connected across the Middle East and into places like Iraq and places like that. And he's already saying, well, there's this church that I would love to invite you to do. It's like, yeah. Okay, let's just get this thing off the ground before we start doing loop the loop. You know, it's great. But there's so many things that Karen will be able to do if we help facilitate him with relationship, with training, and with all of these good things. So that's what the Antioch Network will be. But I want to reiterate, it complements current things. It doesn't overtake them. It doesn't change them. That's really important that we hear that. And that's at the absolute heart of what this is.
Yeah, and I see that a little bit on a local level, that we've got Barnabas Church here, and we've also got Barnabas Community Projects, and they're two independent sort of charities, but they're also completely linked, and it's all Barnabas. And but one of them has a slightly different goal, and so I see this as another way of us expressing church building and development around us, and that's something that very much complements Bread Trust. So as we are taking a step to really want to intentionally step out into this kind of stuff, one thing that we do need is resource. We need budget to be able to do some of these things. We've already got an external mission fund, which we use for some of the international links and some of the support that we give. But as this expands, as this grows, we're going to need more resource in order to do it. And so it's almost like that bit at the beginning of a project. All those projects I listed, at the opening stage, there was like a seed funding. There was like a startup funding to help get it off the ground. So that's what we really need now, really, as we go forward. Phil's just given the example of Nagorno-Karabakh this week, people we're connected with, and an opportunity to help. Another example is there's a new cohort, a new term of the School of Leadership that's in Nairobi, and that's primarily linked with the view of a potential church plant in that great East African city. And so it's a £500 cost. There's more than 10 students. It's £50 each for the term to do the School of Leadership. That's not actually that much money. It's £2 each, the people in the room. But it is if we're doing it here, there, and there, and there. And it's not like we're going to pay for everything, but just these things do cost money. And the more we do, the more it adds up. And the more we have, the more we can do. So just little examples of stuff that's already happening. So we want to prepare. We want to fill the storehouse so that we're ready when the needs come. So it does feel like that moment with Word Online where Martin shared the vision, and then as a church we were able to respond to be able to support and release that ministry. And so we're going to have a gift day, over a couple of weeks. The postcard is on your seats over 2 weeks in October. All the details are on there. And so my encouragement to you would be to please pray and consider what you might give and how you might be able to support this. But just to say, like, this is not a hard sell or being pushy at all. I genuinely believe that this is something amazing to be part of right at the beginning. And so we'd love you to be caught up in the vision of it. We'd love you to be excited with us as we do it. We'd love you to consider the way that you can plug in and bring what you've got to the table as we as a church take on this prophetic call. So there's genuinely no hard sell. There's just an encouragement to you to be excited with us.
And so So what does it mean for us as a church? Well, many of the prophetic words and the sort of the advice from people that I've been speaking to is you've got to build team. Well, that team is here. It's not just here, but it is here. We've already seen it where Chris and Joe Burtonshaw stepped in at the very last minute, because at the very last minute we had a guest from Armenia, and they cared for him, and Linda, his wife, and they looked after him. That's teamwork. To invest in the prophetic. So I've been asking a number of prophetic people to really pray into these things. There's a few here that have been praying into it, and we've got some great prophetic words already, some astonishing prophetic words that we're logging and we're keeping, and we're looking forward. We also have some people further afield that are praying into this. For some of us, it will be about hosting. For some of us, it will be giving. So for some of us, it is literally that our gaze will be lifted to a horizon that is bigger than just Shrewsbury or Shropshire, that it is bigger than that God's view for us as a people, for us as a church, will be different. And so all of these things, so whether it be giving, whether it be hosting, whether it be praying, whether it just be encouraging, for us as a church, I believe that this will be a new step, a more intentional step in a new way into a new era. Already, some of you have come to me and said, I've got this link of old into X country. Would you be interested in meeting? The answer's always yes, by the way. So I will always say yes, I'd love to meet them. Now, whether or not that works, how does it work? Well, we'll play. We'll see. We can go down the line and we can see how it goes. Emma, could we just go back one slide, please? So this afternoon, this website, this page is live. I don't think it's live yet. Oh, it is live now as well, but you mustn't look at it. So it's off the back of the Barnabas website. So you can see there's a red box in the top right-hand corner. You click on that and you'll get this page. Why don't you go and have a look at it? See what you think. This is Meg's hard work over 6 months. We've been working hard to foster relationship, to build this picture, to give an inkling of what it might be. We're praying and we're asking God what it looks like in the future. I'm already talking to different people. There's people here that have been with me to Ukraine. I've been talking to people about coming with me to Kenya. We need to build relationships because this does not revolve around me. It begins by revolving around us, and in the future I believe that it will revolve around many. And so these are the things that I think that it's really important that we talk about. So it's not just one person, it's delegated. It's delegated authority. It's across a decentralized space. And that's really important because we've been called to do something new, something that is a new way. The other thing that God talked to me about very clearly is about sustainable churches. It can't just be the Western churches that are financing everything everywhere. It can't work like that. It doesn't work like that because no one has that level of resource. But God has. And there was one prophetic word. Do you remember the story of when the disciples and then 5,000 people descended and Jesus said to Philip, so this was a prophecy to me from somebody else, he said to Philip, how are we going to feed all these people? I'd never noticed this before, by the way, but this guy prophesied it over me. He said, so Jesus says to Philip, how are we going to feed all these people? But then the next phrase is really important. It said, but Jesus already knew. And he said, that is a prophetic word for you, Philip, for us, Barnabas, that God already knows the answer. We've got to seek him. That's why the prophetic, that's why prayer is so important.
Okay, brilliant. So we're going to draw this presentation to an end